Hi, want to hear something scary?
We were pleasantly surprised when our parents announced a vacation to Hawaii. Excitement filled the air as my sister Seema and I immediately began packing our bags. Now, Seema, in particular, was overjoyed beyond words. Her lifelong fascination with mermaids made her believe that visiting the Hawaiian Islands would provide a genuine opportunity to encounter the Namaka, the captivating Hawaiian goddess of the sea. Upon our arrival at the hotel in the early evening, my parents entrusted me with the task of looking after Seema in her room while they stepped out for a swift dinner. Meanwhile, we ordered room service. Seema, however, had other plans. She pleaded with me to go to the beach and search for Namaka. At first, I declined because I really wanted to enjoy the luxury of having this nice hotel room all to ourselves. But her begging wore me down, and eventually I agreed as long as she promised not to tell her parents. After all, who wants to come back grounded from a vacation? We ventured out of the hotel towards the water. Seema rushed into the waves splashing around. The beach was still fairly busy, so I watched her from the shoreline. An hour passed, and I began to worry that our parents might have returned. I called out to Seema, urging her to come out of the water. However, as we turned around to leave, there was nobody there. The beach had become eerily empty. I thought to myself, there are probably people clearing out due to the sun going down. Nothing crazy. Suddenly, a haunting melody reached our ears, its beauty captivating us in an instant. We exchanged bewildered glances before Seema ran off into the direction of the sound. I called after her, but I wasn't about to chase her down. After a few moments, Seema shuddered back at me, unable to contain her excitement. "Melanie, look, it's a mermaid!" I rolled my eyes. Seema was so gullible. It was bound to be one of those women who dress up for tourists. I headed up to the shore toward her voice. I couldn't believe my eyes. In the light of the sunset, I saw the face of a girl. We cautiously approached the young girl. Drawn in by her enchanting song, she possessed luscious white hair and a face of ethereal beauty. But as we ventured closer, the melody took on a darker tone. The sound intensified, growing deeper and more dissonant. And then I saw she had no legs, just a fin. Panic washed over me, and I desperately lunged forward, reaching out to grab Seema and pull her away from the strange creature. But it was too late. The mermaid, who was now in front of us, began to transform. Her once lovely hair fell out into clumps, and her once musical lips were now sewn shut. Her eyes bulged out of their sockets, streaming with blood. Her skin turned jet black as her bones contorted into horrifying features. Her claws were already firmly clasped around my sister's fragile neck, squeezing the life out of her. Seema's screams pierced the air, a heart-wrenching plea for help that seemed to go unheard in the desolate surroundings. Tears streamed down my face as I watched in horror. My mind racing with desperation. I couldn't let my sister die like this. Summoning every ounce of strength and courage, I lunged myself at the creature, clawing at its twisted limbs, doing anything to try and free Seema from its grip. But the monster was relentless. Its strength far beyond my own. With a sickening sound, it unleashed a fury of savage scratches upon Seema's chest. She cried in anguish. The once beautiful melody that lured us now transformed into a nightmare anguish, accompanying my sister's screams. As I fought fruitlessly against the monster, I felt a searing pain across my own body. I realized that my desperate struggle had left me vulnerable, and the hideous creature had seized the opportunity. It swiftly turned its attention to me, its bloodshot eyes locking onto my helpless form. In an instant, its talons wrapped around my throat. I struggled for air, clawing at the creature's hands, but it was all in vain. Darkness closed in around me, suffocating my senses as I witnessed the life force slowly drain from my sister's eyes. Seema's desperate cries filled the air, but I was powerless to save her. The monster was far stronger than I could have ever imagined. This was not the fairy tale mermaid Seema had read about in her books. I watched helplessly as my sister's life slowly drained away, her innocent spirit extinguished by the merciless claws of a monster. The creature's grip on my throat tightened, and I felt the warmth of my own blood mixing with salt water. "Help," I whispered weakly, desperate, knowing that there was no one to answer my plea. The world faded around me as darkness closed in. When I woke up, I found myself in the depths of the sea. My legs had been torn from my body, replaced by a grotesque tail. The pain was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the torment of my soul. I was no longer human. I had become the creature of the sea, forever cursed to live beneath the waves. Now I reside in the ocean, waiting for unsuspecting children who come searching for mermaids. They are lured by our once beautiful voices, only to meet a horrifying fate. They too join us, trapped in an eternal cycle of misery, victims of their own curiosity and our haunting melodies. I wish I could help it, but it's too late. This is who I am.
Shyla was hurrying to finish her makeup for school when she slammed the medicine chest shut and cracked her mirror. She knew the old superstition that breaking a mirror meant bad luck, but she didn't have time for all that Bloody Mary or trapped souls kids stuff. Besides the spiderweb crack, it was still in one piece, and she finished applying her lipstick. "Oh, I must need coffee," she thought suddenly, as a strange feeling came over her. She ignored it, assuming tiredness and a cold draft from the window had given her a chill. She grabbed a travel mug and headed to school. Much later, she awoke in the middle of the night, that same strange feeling in her gut. She walked to the bathroom to splash water on her face. Wearily, she noticed something didn't look quite right with her reflection, like the glass was dirty. Looking more closely, the face that stared back wasn't her. It was her, but it wasn't. While her own mouth began to open in shock, her reflected face began to grin unnaturally. Her eyes were now jet black orbs like bottomless pits. Although frightened, she took a step closer, her nose practically touching the glass. "How can this?" Suddenly, two arms shot out of the mirror and wrapped around her in a tight grip, dragging her into and through the mirrored surface. Shyla looked back through the mirror to see something standing where she had just been. A creature that looked just like her, but not her. It waved back before disappearing out of the room. After uselessly pounding on the mirror to escape, sobbing, then passing out from exhaustion and shock, Shyla awoke and finally began to explore the place she was being held captive in. It was just a wide, empty space, and instead of windows into the outside, she realized they were the mirrors in her house. In one, she saw her brother Oscar putting gel in his hair, probably getting ready for a date. Did he not notice she was missing? He put some aftershave on his neck before giving himself a wink. Then, all of a sudden, the door opened and a figure walked in. At first, it was hard to make out who it was, but as the moonlight touched its face, two glistening black-orbed eyes shone in the light. It was the mirror doppelganger. Slapping her hand on her side of the mirror, she cried out to Oscar. "That's not me!" she screamed, but it was no good. He couldn't hear her. He turned towards the imposter as it stared at her. Suddenly, it grabbed Oscar, hugging him and patting his hair while staring at her. Then, smiling evilly, it left the room. He seemed safe for now, just perplexed at his sister's sudden odd behavior. Later, she saw her dad shaving to prepare for work. And there, the evil creature was again, inching its way in from the door. It crept closer to her father and bumped into him as his blade was touching his skin. Blood gushed on his white button-down. He scolded the evil doppelganger as if it were her. "Be more careful, Shyla. Look at this." The real Shyla wept on the other side of the mirror. "It's not me, Dad. It's not me." But he couldn't hear. It stared at her from its side of the mirror, reveling in her pain. Days passed. She had no idea how long she'd been trapped. As hard as Shyla tried, she couldn't seem to get out. Who knows what the creature was doing or what it wanted, pretending to be her. Then, just as Shyla was about to give up hope, the imposter showed up in front of her mirror. It reached back through the cracked mirror, dragging her to the other side. Just like that, it was over, and she was home. Shyla ran out of the room. She passed by her brother first, but froze in the doorway. Oscar was talking into his phone and was holding a knife, shaking, whispering about something being horribly wrong with his sister, of being afraid to go to sleep at night. Scared to approach him, she hurried on to find her dad. He looked haggard, worried, and unkempt, with several bandages on his hands and one eye bandaged. She ran over to hug him, but he jumped up from his chair and warily backed away, saying he would get help for her, but none of them would be able to forgive everything that she'd done that easily. Shyla didn't know what the doppelganger had done to her family. "Please, Daddy," she cried. "It wasn't me. It's the mirror, the broken mirror in my bathroom." But her dad just turned away. Confused and upset, Shyla left to find her friends at their usual hangout, and as they saw her coming, they fled, calling back, "Stay away from us, you psychopath." Psychopath. What had that terrible thing done to her life? She walked back home with mixed feelings, relieved to be back, but devastated by the fallout. How could she ever explain it? Any of it? And suddenly, she felt angry. She hadn't done anything. It was the mirror. She ran into the house and tore the cracked mirror off the wall, smashing it to pieces and dumping it in the trash can outside. Sighing in relief, Shyla headed back inside to find her dad and to try to explain, to apologize. But she stopped as she saw him sitting on the couch. An impossibly wide grin stretched across his face, because she knew what it was. She could even see the jet black orbs of that thing staring back at her from her father's face. Its broken whisper echoed all around. "Too late. Daddy already looked in the mirror, and now I'm back."
Despite horror movies being extremely rare in Egypt, Yassine, an inspiring director, felt like he had the perfect script. The story was simple. After the death of his only daughter, a grief-stricken doctor leaves his family home and moves into an old mansion only to experience some violent hauntings. So he calls a spiritualist to investigate. Yassine had cast a real-life spiritualist for the role who had expert knowledge of the paranormal. Saeed El-Husseini Al-Fayek was well known for specializing in black magic. Yassine encouraged him to act as he typically would during an investigation. When they were shooting the exorcism scene, the crew watched in awe as the spiritualist recited a powerful incantation. The spiritualist read Al-Tizar Al-Blar Hatya, written in an ancient language and needed to be chanted at a very specific pace. In addition, the precise pronunciation of each word was required in order to banish jinns. As Al-Fayek ended the monologue, the crew cheered. Less than 10 people in the world could perform it correctly, as it takes many years to master. Any small mistake could be catastrophic, since it was believed that no spirit could disobey a summoning incantation. Once performed, the words opened the door for the spirit realm, allowing entry to the human world. Yassine was thrilled with the performance and asked a cinematographer to check the footage. But as they began to watch, They were baffled to discover most of the footage was distorted. When the scene with Alpayek's big moment began to play, the cameraman looked in horror. "Sir," he mumbled, "who are these people?" His fingers shook as he pointed towards the screen. Yassine stared at the screen in disbelief. There were shadows of people in the footage who had not been on the set. The director insisted it was probably just something on that reel, but the cinematographer knew it wasn't his fault. The spirits were glaring back at them, and the distortion appeared only on that reel with the incantation scene. However, time was short and they decided to wrap up the production as quickly as possible. The movie was released and tickets for the premiere sold out fast, as Egyptian citizens were eager to get a taste of the rare homegrown horror movie. Yassine sat in a packed audience enjoying the fruits of his labor. When the incantation scene took place, a woman began screaming and crying. As people rushed to help her, others began to vomit, unable to control themselves. Some claimed they felt cold hands touching them, and others left the theater out of fear that something else other than just a movie was going on. And this wasn't a one-off incident. This happened all over the country whenever the film was being screened. One theater even burned down with no explainable source of the fire. That was enough for authorities to pull the movie. Yassine was devastated. The cinematographer was certain it was the incantation, and after close inspection, Yassine discovered the spiritualist's horrific act of deceit. Alpayek had purposely recited the exact words, not to exorcise the jinn as instructed, but to open a portal. The crew was terrified. Egyptian culture is very strict about black magic. It was not to be messed with, and those who use it to hurt others will become servants of the devil. Yassine desperately tried to find Alpayek to retract the spell, but he seemed to have disappeared. Years later, Yassine received a strange phone call. Alpayek's wife had found him laying on his back on the floor of his office, his face blue as though he had been suffocated. His jaw was cracked open, and there was black tears running down his cheeks. His eyes were as wide as dinner plates staring at the ceiling, and above him was a dark stain that looked like a burn mark. When the police arrived, they discovered many handkerchiefs stained with blood and copious amounts of milk, both things synonymous with black magic. And there were hundreds of photos of celebrities with strange incantations and spells written on the back, including one of Yassine from their time on set. There was no logical explanation for his death. His autopsy showed no signs of physical trauma, poisoning, or even cardiac arrest. The case was closed quickly. No one wanted to return to the scene. It seemed Alpayek had truly become a servant of the devil, seduced by riches and infamy.
Dante's Museum of the Occult was a scary place after dark, but for Carla, it was a second home. In a hushed voice, she spoke to an eager tour group inside the museum as she guided them through the dusty, cavernous halls filled with occult artifacts, some of which were supposed to prove the existence of demons walking the earth. The final stop of the tour was her favorite. Niafnor, a four-legged, four-armed, four-eyed creature. A demon lord, also known as Mantis, she explained. Feared since ancient civilization, these horns you're looking at are the only physical evidence of its existence. It is strictly prohibited to come in contact with the horns, Carla warned. Carla proudly talked about the blackened and cracked demon horns, said to have dark, mystical properties. That whoever rejoined them onto the body of Niafnor would be granted immortality. With a soft giggle, she tried to contain her excitement at the guests' reactions. Some were amused or amazed, but most were very disturbed. That even included her coworkers, who often skipped this part of the tour when they gave it. After the last tour of the day, Carla ushered out the final guests and was shutting off the lights and locking the door when she heard someone shout for her to wait. She looked over, and saw a young boy covered head to toe in a baggy hoodie and sweatpants moving swiftly towards her with his walker. It was her favorite patron, AJ, a frequent visitor to the museum who shared Carla's macabre love for the horns of Niefnor. Although she was always happy to see the young patron, she told him it was late, that she was closing up for the night.
"Oh, come on, Carla. Please?"
AJ said with his puppy dog eyes that always somehow convinced her. She had a soft spot for the kid, so she gave him 10 minutes to stay, but that was it. She waved him in, and together, within the darkened museum, they gazed upon the majestic horns of Niefnor in appreciative silence. Until AJ softly cleared his throat and said,
"Can we hold the horns this time, Carla? Please? You keep saying one day we would."
the boy pleaded. Carla gazed longingly at the horns as she considered the boy's request. She often thought about if they were really genuine, that if she could just touch them, she'd know for sure. She'd been obsessed with the demon ever since she read about it in a comic book when she was younger. She often dreamed of seeing it in all its glory, its rise and rule over the earth with her by its side. Suddenly, Carla realized she had opened the display case, her hands reaching for the horns.
"Just this once, AJ," she whispered. "Nobody but us can ever know."
As her hands finally closed around the coveted horns, she smiled and turned to look at AJ, who answered her smile with a greedy, evil one. The whites of his eyes were suddenly swallowed by his black pupils, and they began to bulge out of his head. A deep, guttural voice came out of him.
"The sacrifice has accepted. Bring me the horns."
Carla, filled with fear, couldn't stop herself. It was as if she was being controlled. Lifting the heavy horns from the case, they began to heat from the inside out, and her hands seared in pain. Her hands adhered to them. She yelled in agony while the stench of burning flesh filled the room. Carla tried to fight it, but she brought the horns to AJ. He told her the reason they'd always connected is because she had a greater purpose: to serve the dread demon Niefnor, to help him achieve his final form. Then AJ's body began to grow and contort. As his limbs grew past the baggy clothing, demonic flesh was revealed. Carla shook with sudden understanding. This demonic form of Niefnor's had one set of arms, legs, and eyes, but its final form was supposed to have 4. She tried to run, but without warning, AJ tore Carla's legs from her body, leaving her writhing in pain as he stabbed them into his own hips. The demon lord roared.
"These 2 legs complete Niefnor's 4.
Her arms were torn from her torso and forced into his chest, while Carla shrieked and bled in agony.
"These 2 arms complete Niefnor's 4.
The demon chanted. Through her pain and misery, Carla realized she was a spell component in some grim, long-forgotten magic. Finally, he scooped her eyes out with the sharp points of the horns. The blackened horns erupted in a hellish red glow as new eyes erupted from what was once AJ's sweet, childlike face.
"These 2 eyes complete Niefnor's 4.
Gaping holes opened on the demon's head as he used Carla's hands to seat his horns into their places. The hellish red glow now engulfed his body, merging Carla's limbs seamlessly into him as if that is where they had always been. His transformation complete, Niefnor smiled into the emptiness of the once again silent Dante's museum. Lifting Carla's body, she cried out in pain as he spun her around, cauterizing all her wounds with a demonic fire as he declared,
"Thank you, loyal servant. For your sacrifice, you shall rule forever by my side. Come, it is time for this world to once again fear my name."
Through her pain, Carla smiled.
Ivan hated science class. He felt like dissecting animals was cruel and there were other ways to learn about anatomy. When his teacher, Mr. Johnson, insisted that Ivan cut up the frog with the rest of the class, Ivan couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he discreetly shoved the frog in his backpack and took it home with him. His lab partner, Alejandra, covered for him, since she also had no desire to dissect a formerly living thing. At lunch, they met up in the bathroom and took the frog out of Ivan's backpack. But looking closely, they noticed it had 2 extra legs. Ivan decided to name it Gaston. He knew the frog was dead, but decided he would give it a proper burial at his house. It felt like the right thing to do after all. After school, Ivan dug a hole in his backyard. He said a prayer for Gaston, putting him in a tiny box, and buried him. He placed some flowers from his garden on top of the pile of dirt. Ivan was restless that night. Usually, he fell asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow, and not waking up until the alarm would go off. Instead, he tossed and turned all night in between dreams of being chased by frogs. He finally gave in around 6 a.m., feeling groggy and grumpy. He decided to check the site before he headed to school and noticed that the dirt surrounding Gaston's grave had been disturbed. He thought that was very strange, but assumed it was a nosy wild animal and would take a closer look after school. That evening, while Ivan was in his bedroom doing homework, he heard a strange noise coming from his closet. He cautiously made his way towards the sound. He opened the door slowly. He didn't see anything. Then the noise sounded again, and there on the floor was Gaston. He was staring at Ivan with icy blue eyes. Ivan was in shock. The creature had been dead when it was given to him in class, and he buried it. He called the only person who would believe him, Alejandra. Alejandra rushed over to have a look and confirmed that this was the frog from class with the 2 extra legs. She then pulled out her phone and Googled the frogs with extra limbs. The first thing to come up was the Handbook of Slavic Folklore. Within the same link, she learned about the Bukovac and found an image that looked just like Gaston. The ancient creature was a demonic monster with icy blue eyes, 6 limbs, and horns that killed everything in its way. Then, it exploded, giving birth to hundreds of tiny Bukovacs. Alejandra explained to Ivan that they needed to get rid of this creature immediately. As she bent down to scoop up Gaston, she felt a burning sensation on her fingers. Before she could drop the frog, they watched in horror as the skin on her hand melted off. Alejandra screamed in pain before passing out. While Ivan grabbed a towel and threw the monster out the window, Alejandra spent hours at the hospital getting skin grafted onto her hand. Ivan went home and slept for hours due to exhaustion. When he awoke, staring across from him was Gaston. Except this time, Gaston was the size of a bowling ball, with horns on his head. He also had something furry sticking out of his mouth. As Ivan slowly made his way towards Gaston for a closer look, he gagged and jumped back in horror. It was the paw of his orange cat. Ivan's parents appeared at his door when they heard the commotion. And much to his horror, he noticed that their eyes were now the same icy blue color as Gaston's. Just as Ivan's mother asked him what was wrong, a gnat flew by, and she extended her tongue far beyond its normal reach and gobbled it up. His parents had somehow become hosts for whatever creature Gaston was. He realized he needed to kill Gaston in order to get his parents back to themselves. He ran to the kitchen to grab a knife, then raced back upstairs where he stabbed Gaston repeatedly, leaving severed body parts all over his room. His parents collapsed onto the floor, their eyes still blue, but now lifeless. Ivan shook his mom, but it was no use. She was gone. As he cried out in grief, he started to hear croaking again. Gaston reappeared. He was now the size of a large dog. He looked into Ivan's eyes. opened his mouth and swallowed Ivan's dad whole. He then leapt onto Ivan's chest, pinning him to the floor. Ivan's skin started to burn. He struggled for his breath, but the frog was too strong. Ivan was consumed limb by limb. A few days later, the police showed up after getting calls about a bullfrog infestation in the neighborhood. Ivan and his parents were nowhere to be found. The only person who knew the truth was Alejandra, but nobody believed a 13-year-old, so the Bukovac was never caught. It remains out there hungry, waiting. They say on still evenings, you can hear a dull croaking, intended to lure its next victim into the shadows.
Gabriel didn't like having to leave his heavily pregnant wife and son when he traveled for work to Manila. But not only did he have to pay the bills, but he had to pay off the huge gambling debt he'd accumulated over the years. His family knew nothing about his secret addiction or the amount of money he owed, and now there would soon be another mouth to feed. He needed to take any work offered to help pay it off. This particular construction job had come without warning, and he had had little time to figure out a sitter. Luckily, he'd found a woman named Ning through an online posting. She said she could look after Josh, and she could also stop by to do the chores. Despite not knowing a thing about her, she reminded him of his grandmother, and he was desperate. She'd appeared at the perfect time. The first day Gabriel was away, Ning picked Josh up from school and made dinner. In the evening, Josh rubbed oil on his mother's feet and helped her to bed, like his dad had instructed him. After tucking her in, he looked back to make sure she was safe and comfortable. He smiled, and he went into his own room to get some rest. Around midnight, Josh was awakened by strange noises coming from his mother's room. He leapt up from his bed to rush to her aid. He swung the door open and was greeted by a terrifying vision. Peering down at his mother from the ceiling was a horrific-looking creature. Its lower torso seemed to be missing, entrails flapping from where the stomach ended. Sure enough, with a quick dart of his eyes, Josh confirmed the lower half of the body stood in the corner of the room, macabrely awaiting reattachment. Huge leathery bat wings kept it afloat, and an enormous elongated tongue protruded from its maw. When it looked at Josh, he had a glimmer of recognition. This thing was Ning, the mysterious sitter. "Mom!" She heard him and begged for help, and he knew he had to do something before the monster destroyed his mother and unborn sibling. She was weeping and praying for her baby, but seemed unable to move. "She's a manananggal. Josh, you must kill her and save your sibling." Josh felt the room sway as he fought to stay conscious, terror washing over him. Manananggal is a creature that during daylight looks like a normal human, but when on the hunt, separates from its lower body and grows wings. This allows it to fly and maneuver easily towards its prey. The 4 feet long proboscis-like tongue was designed with one sole purpose: to suck the blood of pregnant mothers and to suck up the fetus. Despite his fear, he grabbed his father's baseball bat and began swinging at the beast's wings. It hissed at Josh with vampire-like fangs. He went in to hit it again, but this time it used its massive wing to knock him against the wall, the bat flying under the bed. Josh desperately searched for another weapon, but the monster was back over, tongue extended. She tried to cover her belly, but the creature used its human arms to pin her down. Josh panicked, sensing only one choice left. "Take me instead," he cried out, his voice cracking. "Leave my mom. You can have me, all my blood." "No," sobbed his mom, but the manananggal was interested. It swung its wing at her face, knocking her out, then swooped over to Josh. Despite his terror, he felt noble, knowing his father would have been proud that he'd sacrificed himself for his mama and the baby. The creature grabbed Joshua by the neck and bit, sinking in its fangs. Blood spilled all over them, splattering the walls, and then threw his body with such force he smashed through the window, landing outside. Poor Josh was dead before he hit the ground. The Manananggal lapped up the residual blood, but was unsatisfied. It extended out its proboscis. Air whistled eagerly into the elongated tubular tongue as the monster headed back to the unconscious mom. As blood soaked the sheets, it took mere moments to suck the fetus out of the navel and swallow it whole, leaving the mother to bleed to death alone. The following morning, just a day after his departure, Gabriel entered his family's home. He walked about the living room, shouting for everyone. He had made a decision he was excited to share. He had postponed the job for now. Despite the pressure to pay the debts, it hadn't felt right to be away. He'd just have to continue hiding his gambling for now and somehow work extra hard once the baby was born. As he put his things down and wondered why no one was answering, he made his way to his wife's bedroom. As he fell to his knees in horror, gasping for air, Ning entered with a basket of laundry. She screamed and dropped it, running to console Gabriel, appearing as shocked as he was at the devastation. The massacre she, the Manananggal, had caused. For years after, Ning stayed, practically attached to Gabriel's side, a faithful housekeeper, a doting friend of the family, including when he remarried. And when the happy couple announced they were expecting twins, well, you can imagine Ning's delight. When they were 13, Nikki and Annalise were inseparable. What made the two best friends so close was their insatiable curiosity for everything strange and spooky. Magic workings with herbs, spirits, and, very, very rarely, blood pacts. They loved doing it all. And the one thing that always captivated them most was the old dilapidated house on Warren Way. Their parents told them to stay away from the house because a very suspicious old woman lived there, but the girls suspected something more. They had heard the woman did magic works involving curses and other forms of very dark magic, and that is what intrigued Nikki and Annalise. One day, they worked up the courage to visit the old woman. They approached the house with visions of bubbling potions and dusty spellbooks running through their heads, but what awaited them was something far more powerful. Before Nikki could knock on the door, it swung open with a loud creak, revealing a tiny, harmless-looking old woman. Her skin was as wrinkled as her clothes, but she had kind eyes. She welcomed them inside, asking them what had compelled them to visit her. They were silent. She asked if they wanted to maybe lay a curse on someone. They shook their heads, shrugged their shoulders. The old woman paused, and then, smiling wickedly, said, "Do you want to know how you will die?" The girls looked at each other, and their eyes widened. Annalise nodded, and the woman ushered the girls to an antique lace-covered table, covered in ritualistic fare. Nikki and Annalise exchanged a look and giggled. This was exactly the kind of thing they were hoping for. But when the old woman sat down, things got serious. She held a doll that looked exactly like Annalise. Straight red hair, green eyes, and pale pink skin. The old woman examined Annalise and the doll, and then closed her eyes. After an impossibly long silence, the crafty magic user spoke. "You will be poisoned by the one you love most." Annalise clenched Nikki's hand under the table as they watched the little doll transform. It no longer looked like Annalise. It now had curly brown hair, brown eyes, and tawny beige skin, exactly like Nikki. They both gasped. This woman really was magical. She shushed them and then studied Nikki. She sat in silence even longer until she looked at Nikki with an almost gleeful expression on her weathered face. "You will choke to death on your own hair, fed to you by a woman named Magdalena," the death teller warned. Suddenly, there was a loud, thunderous crack as a gust of wind blew through the abode, sending dust and cobwebs everywhere. Both Nikki and Annalise screamed and ran as fast as they could out of the house. Outside, with the wind howling around them, they finally swore their strongest blood pact to take revenge on the other's killer, even after death. A crack of thunder then had them screaming and running to their separate homes. However, soon after that, their friendship was never quite the same, and eventually, they drifted apart from each other and the occult. Nikki became paranoid and spent her youth looking over her shoulder for Magdalena, the woman who might kill her with her own hair. Conversely, Annalise lived life wildly and as fully as possible, expecting her death from poison would come at any moment. A decade later, when Nikki was 23, she heard that Annalise married a beautiful fellow co-ed she'd met in college. But shortly after the wedding, Annalise died suddenly, a tragic accidental poisoning. The death teller's prediction had come true. Nikki decided to fly home to visit Annalise's family. She felt guilty that she'd grown apart from her best friend all those years ago, and honestly, more than a little part of her hoped she could figure out a way to avoid the horrific death promised. As she drove through her old neighborhood, she passed through Warren Way to catch a glimpse of the death teller's old house. It was long gone, replaced with a small duplex. Nikki breathed a sigh of relief as she made her way to Annalise's family home. Before Nikki could knock on the door, it swung open on its own. Inside, the house was dark and dusty, as if no one lived there anymore. Nikki backed away until she saw a beautiful young woman coming down the stairway dressed in black funeral attire. It was Annalise's widow. The widow looked at her with kind eyes and said, "You must be Nikki. My name is Magdalena." Suddenly, the widow's skin wrinkled and her hair turned fully gray as she cackled. No longer a grief-stricken young lady, she became the wicked old curse wielder from Warren Way. Nikki turned to run, but it was too late. Magdalena pinned her against the wall with unnerving strength powered by dark magics. She ripped the hair from Nikki's scalp and began shoving it down her throat. As Nikki choked to death, old Magdalena smiled. The curse she had placed on both girls a decade ago was complete. Tonight, she would do a ritual with the flesh from both dead bodies and add 100 years to her own long life. But suddenly, she froze in fear as she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Don't you want to know how you'll die, Magdalena?" one voice said, as another then added, "Our pact screams for revenge for each other's killer, and both are you." The now double-cursed evildoer fearfully turned to face the wrathful poltergeist of both Annalise and Nikki, best friends reunited by their decade-long blood pact in the afterlife. Nikki then smiled and accurately foretold Magdalena's death. "Your life ends now, with your soul ripped apart by two furious ghosts."
In the early 1900s, the seaside town of Japan was a well-known hub for world travelers. Visitors could find all types of strange and unusual goods in the marketplace. And that is where this particular nightmare began. 17-year-old Ekichi Suzuki was determined to find the perfect Christmas present for his baby sister. Just minutes before his boat was to take him to Hiroshima, he saw it. The most beautiful porcelain doll he ever laid eyes on. In a glass case, standing 20 inches tall, she had shoulder-length hair that was done up in a traditional okapa style. Her piercing black eyes drew him in. With seconds to spare, the exchange was made and the proud big brother was on his way home with the perfect present. On Christmas Day, Ekichi presented the gift to his 2-year-old sister, Okiku. She was immediately infatuated. It wasn't long before Okiku dismissed all other toys in favor of her doll. She even named the doll Okiku after herself. When her brother asked her why she gave the doll her own name, she replied, "Because I am her, and she is me." The two Okikus began to look alike. Their hairstyles and outfits often matched. People would find Okiku speaking to the doll as if the doll was speaking right back to her. But as Okiku got older, her interest began to change. She began to forget her doll. Not all the time, but just often enough that strange things began to happen. There was this one time Okiku went to a friend's house and left her doll at home. When she returned to her house, her bedroom had been ransacked. Another time, Okiku forgot to bring her doll to a sleepover. When she fell asleep, Okiku had terrible nightmares that a doll was following her with a torch. The next morning, Okiku returned home to find a small fire had occurred in her bedroom. Okiku stayed clear of the doll. It wasn't long after that Okiku became sick, contracting what appeared to be yellow fever, a debilitating disease that infected so many people at that time. Luckily, Okiku's doll was right by her side. Being bedbound due to the illness, the two became inseparable again. The house staff couldn't even take the doll out of Okiku's hands to change the bedding. The child and the doll were constantly attached to one another. Whispers began swirling among the household that its black eyes were turning the same emerald green as Okiku's. Its cheeks were flushed like a human's, and one of the servants swore the doll had blinked. But Okiku just held on tighter as each day passed. Then one morning, Ikichi stopped by his sister's room. He opened the door to find her in her bed, eyes wide open and eyes black. Her body was ice cold. He tried to resuscitate her, but it was no use. What stood out was how tightly her doll was holding on to her. It made him feel uneasy, but grateful Okiku didn't die alone. The family was determined to bury the doll with Okiku, but circumstances and governmental oversight prevented this last act of kindness. They needed to find another place for it. The doll sat on the family's altar so they could pay tribute to her. Weeks went by, and they noticed the doll's hair looked like it was growing. Eventually, the doll's hair reached its waist. Then, other strange things began to happen. The lights would flicker, doors slammed, and the doll would randomly move about the house without anyone's aid. At first, this gave them comfort. They believed it was Okiku paying a spiritual visit. But then everyone began having nightmares. The morning after another sleepless night, Okiku's mom took a tumble down the stairs. She survived, but swore she had been pushed by the doll. Now, if she actually was, or if she just blamed the doll for her lack of sleep, it no longer mattered. Either way, the doll needed to go. Ikichi tried to burn the doll at his mother's request, but its resemblance to his sister was too strong. He couldn't harm her. Instead, he went to the shamans. They agreed to take the doll and observe it. There was no denying her hair grew and grew. After trimming it, they sent a lock of the doll's hair to be tested. The results were shocking. The doll was growing human hair. But when Ekichi returned to the shaman, Okiku had vanished. A year later, the seaside town of Sapporo had not seemed to change much. It was still packed with people collecting souvenirs and trinkets, hoping to take a little piece of Japan on their journey. And tucked away in the back of a shop, inside a glass case, stood a beautiful doll. 20 inches tall, with raven black hair. The bell to the door rang, and in walked a father with his young daughter. It only took a moment before her eyes met with the doll, and an exchange was made. Soon, the child was traveling back home with a new companion. She swore the doll had smiled. Her father was pleased because his usually reserved daughter had a new playmate.
Yusuf had always been a restless sleeper, even as a baby. Now as a teenager, he couldn't remember the last time he slept through the night. The tossing and turning eventually grew to insomnia, and his mother decided to get him some help. The doctor's prescription would not only ensure Yusuf fell asleep easily, but he'd be able to stay asleep and hopefully get the 8 or so hours he needed. A literal dream come true, as she would no longer be so concerned about the giant bags under his eyes or his constant fatigue. The night after they'd been to the doctor, around 10 p.m., Yusuf swallowed his little green pill, and within 15 minutes, his eyes grew heavy and his body let go of all tension. He climbed into bed, hopeful. His eyes closed and he drifted away. After a time, he fell into the REM cycle and began to dream. He started seeing strange, dark images, an ominous shadow following as he walked. Tree limbs grabbed at him as he passed by, eerie noises fast on his heels, the makings of one of his normal nightmares. These scary scenes felt familiar to him, so he consciously told himself to wake up and pinched himself on the arm, which usually did the trick. But he was stuck. As he ran down a dark alley, his realization sent him into a full panic. He had to wake up. Right about now was usually when his eyes would typically open, his body jerking awake. But because of the medication, he couldn't. He was now trapped in this nightmarish purgatory. His heart raced as the shadowy creature crept behind him. As it emerged, Yusuf could see its bony, skeletal appearance, and his eyes bulged in fear. He knew right away it was a jinn. Remembering his Baba telling him of the beast from Turkish folklore, the jinn would sit on your arms and chest, covering your mouth, and would strangle you in your sleep. Murderous sleep paralysis. Yusuf reminded himself it was just a dream, as the skeletal monstrosity inched closer. A human skull rested on its neck, the mandible barely held together with no more than an inch of flesh and tendon. It had no eyes, yet it still held an unearthly glow in the pits of where they should have been, with twin black and yellow trails leaking out of the holes. He could read the hungry expression in its sockets as it looked directly at him. It reached out a bony finger to trail curiously down Yusuf's plump cheek, its flesh burning cold to the touch. Yusuf's eyes darted around in a panic, but the situation was inescapable. He'd never gotten this far into the nightmare. Perhaps this was the reason for his insomnia. He looked down at his watch, which he prayed was showing the correct time. In reality, it read 6:59 a.m. Just as the creature grabbed Yusuf, pulling him closer, Yusuf's alarm went off. Thank heavens. He jolted awake in his bed, but he was struck with secondary terror. Despite being awake, he was unable to move any part of his head or body at all. Lying there, it dawned on him he was still in the clutches of the beast. And there it was, the jinn's skeletal hand pinning his shoulder down. It leaned forward, just as Yusuf tried and failed to scream. It pressed into his throat with its bony hands, cutting off all air. Yusuf desperately wanted to claw at the beast to get away, but he was paralyzed. After minutes of excruciating pain, Yusuf's body surrendered. The jinn disappeared, leaving no trace. Another soul claimed. When Yusuf's mother opened the door to his room an hour later, she saw her son's lifeless body, his bloodshot eyes bulging open, frozen in place. The coroner would rule it an adverse reaction to the sleeping pills. But the truth is, if it weren't for the pill that kept Yusef in a sleeping state, the jinn never would have had the opportunity to fully emerge and take his life. Rather than help Yusef, the sleeping aid had helped the jinn to its dark dealings. The onslaught of phone notifications woke Ari up around 3 a.m. Wondering why their phone was buzzing, Ari blinked at the alerts from the app where they'd uploaded themselves doing the latest dance challenge. The clip was going viral, much to Ari's surprise. Why is my video getting so many shares? Ari wondered, opening the app to see what people were saying. The video played automatically, and Ari laughed looking at themselves. Oof, I am awkward, they thought. Are people making fun of me? The most liked comment read, 13 seconds had me dead. And other comments had skull reactions and ghost emojis after words like, creepy, when you see it. Weirded out, Ari replayed the video and stopped at 13 seconds. They were crouched down by the stairs, stuck in a pose just before jumping into the air. Staring hard at the surroundings around themselves, Ari's vision landed on something strange. On the stairs was a small face, peeking out from between the bars. Zooming in, they saw what looked like a ghostly boy watching them with a round face and bowl cut, just sitting there. When the video resumed, Ari jumped and the boy's face on the staircase was gone. Ari was home alone. Immediately, Ari put the phone on the bedside table and turned on the bedroom lights. Opening the door, they flipped the hall lights on too. The stairs creaked. It's only the house shifting, Ari said out loud. But just to be sure they were alone, Ari stepped over to the top of the stairs and looked down. Below them, outside the cone of light spilling from above, was darkness. Out of that dark, the boy appeared, crab crawling up the stairs towards Ari. With a scream, Ari ran back to their room. Ari got back in bed and hid under the blanket. They took a deep breath, questioning what they saw. There was a succession of knocks on the door. A gasp caught in Ari's throat and their phone buzzed twice. Reaching out to grab it, they saw a small hand swipe it with a giggle. Ari hid under the blanket as the shadows of the small boy ran around the room. The light switch was then flicked off. Engulfed in darkness and without a phone, Ari was terrified. What did this ghost kid want? Paralyzed with fear, a chill took over the room. A weight shifted onto the mattress. The light of Ari's phone glowed through the blanket, getting closer and closer. Throwing the blanket away, Ari jumped off the bed and ran to the light switch. When the room was illuminated, something fell against their feet. It was Ari's phone. Looking at the screen, Ari noticed it was on the app, recording on selfie mode. And that's when the little boy appeared behind them, hovering over their shoulder. It stretched its jaw in a hollow moan, making Ari shriek and run from the room, a haunting laughter behind them as they ran downstairs. When Ari looked at their phone, the option to upload popped on the screen. Replaying the recorded scare over and over, Ari looked to the stairs and the ghost sat looking on. It dawned on Ari that the ghost boy must have seen that it was noticed in the first video. Noticed for the first time and no longer alone. Is it that you want them to see you? Ari hesitantly asked the ghost boy. The ghost boy nodded, clapping, eager to go again. It was ready to scare more people into watching them both. Ari hit upload. We can do another one tomorrow. Heart still racing, Ari wondered just what the spirit might do if it wasn't appeased. What if the next video didn't get as much attention or go viral like the first? Will the ghost boy turn on them?
Yes, more,
the spirit ordered as its jaw unhinged in a big ghastly smile. The next night, there was a knock on Ari's door. Ari knocked back and the door opened. It was time for the next video.
I used to think my family hated me. Maybe hate is a strong word, but I definitely did not feel particularly well liked. I was my parents' least favorite compared to my two younger sisters. They just never seemed to want to be around me or talk to me. They wouldn't even let me take care of our hamster, Lulu. I thought I was being paranoid, but my parents' cold demeanor became more apparent when we moved into a new house. They gave me the room at the very end of a hallway, secluded and removed from everything else. They claimed it was so I could have privacy, but I think they just wanted me far away. That room gave me the creeps. I remember the first night there, I woke up and heard hushed voices echoing in the walls of my room. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, except for my name, the many times it came up. The next morning, I told my mom about the voices and that I thought the house might be haunted. You must have heard the pipes or something, she said dismissively, but I know what I heard. I also knew arguing with her wasn't going to go anywhere, so I decided to suck it up. I went to bed with such anxiety that night that I had an incredibly lucid and horrifying nightmare. I was strapped down to my bed, surrounded by dark figures who were chanting over and over, and I couldn't move or scream. I just laid there while these figures sprinkled me with unknown substances. The next morning at breakfast, I silently ate while my parents asked my sisters how school was going. Then Jamie, one of my sisters, turned to me. "Are you still hearing things at night, Sissy?" she asked. I was actually a little startled by the sudden attention on me. Yeah, and I actually had a pretty bad dream last night. Felt like there were people in my room or something." My sister then turned to look at my parents. I felt like they were telepathically talking about me right in front of me. Then Jamie spoke again. "Mom, you should give her that stuff to make her sleep better." My mom nodded. I was still taken aback by this sudden interest in helping me sleep better. So before bed that night, I swallowed the pill that my mom gave me. As an extra precaution, I gathered as many religious items from around the house, crucifixes, paintings, as many as my hands could carry, and put them in my room. I thought they would protect me from whatever was haunting me during my sleep. The following morning, I woke up in a panic. Everything I had put up the night before was now on the ground, shattered in pieces. I knew my parents were not going to be happy, but I also felt like this was proof that there was something in my room. So I ran to tell my parents. "There must have been an earthquake during the night, I guess," my mom said. But nothing else in the house was broken, only the religious items in my room. It didn't add up. I spent that whole day crying in my room. Before bedtime, Jamie came in with her hands cupped in a ball. She hopped on my bed and opened her hands. "Here, maybe Lulu will help you sleep tonight," she said. I glanced out the door and back at my sister. Is Mom okay with that? She doesn't have to know. I thanked my sister and lay down to bed, snuggling Lulu in my hands. When I woke up the next morning, Lulu had moved. I felt around my pillows and blankets, but I couldn't find her. I realized it was an idiotic idea to fall asleep like that with a tiny animal. I figured she must have run out of my room under the door in the middle of the night, so I went looking for her. The rest of my family was already up and in the middle of breakfast. I couldn't let them know I had lost Lulu, so I decided to continue my search after I had a couple bites. But after swallowing one spoonful of cereal, I spit it out onto the table. I suddenly felt incredibly nauseous. I began dry heaving over the table until I coughed up a small clump of brown fur. My family immediately stood up and began praying the Lord's Prayer. I felt dizzy and blacked out. When I came to, I was strapped on my bed with my family standing around me, sprinkling unknown substances all over me. "What are you doing? Why do you hate me?" I cried, frantically trying to release myself. The expressions of each of my family members turned to sadness. "We don't hate you, Desiree," my dad said. "We hate who you become at night." I don't understand. "You've tried to kill each and every one of us in your sleep," my dad continued, "multiple times." "We're trying to help you, Sissy," Jamie chimed in. but nothing seems to be working. I didn't know what to think. This whole time, I thought that I was being traumatized by a demon in my room, and I was the demon. My family didn't hate me. They're just afraid of me. And I think I am too.
In light of Asian and Pacific Islander Month, we draw inspiration from a South Korean urban legend which acts as a cautionary tale. Don't take things that don't belong to you, especially from the dead. Late one evening, Yoo Young was driving from his parents back to his college in Busan. It was a stormy night and the roads were treacherous, but he had an important test the following day. Trying to keep safe by staying within the speed limit and focusing on what was in front of him on the road, he couldn't believe what he saw right in front of him. Right there on the side of the road was a messed up car. It seemed like a car had crashed straight into a tree. Yoo Young was conflicted. He was wondering, should he stop? Should he keep going? But he had to see if anyone was all right. Yet, judging from the mess of the car, it was highly unlikely that there were any survivors. His hands trembled against the steering wheel as he slowed down, the rain pouring against the windshield. Now, he gathered all his strength as he pulled over and, with a deep breath, exited the car. It was eerily quiet, and while he was relieved that no one was screaming from inside the vehicle, he felt very unnerved by the silence. It was too dark to see anything through the windows, so he mustered all his courage to open the driver's door. And he immediately saw that the driver was dead, and there was nothing that could be done. He stepped away from the vehicle when all of a sudden something caught his eye. The man was holding an object, which hung limply from his hand. It was a photograph. Yoo Young didn't know why, but he felt like he had to take it. And impulsively, he reached into the car, shuddering as he brushed up against the man's arm, quickly grabbed the photograph without looking at it. He sped back up to his car and drove away as quickly as possible so he could get back to his campus on time. Yoo Young hurried into his dorm and shook himself dry. Sitting on the bed, he finally allowed himself to look at the eerie photograph that he had just taken from a dead man. There, he studied the photograph and saw that there was this beautiful girl with long, dark hair. She was wearing a pretty tank with an M on it. She had a playful expression and her right hand was raised, holding 2 fingers up to the camera, the universal peace sign. Despite having no idea who this young woman was, he was very captivated by her beauty. He studied the photo, turned it around, and hoped that he would find a clue as to who she was, or figure out where this photo was taken. But there was nothing. Still, he was so drawn to her, he felt the need to carry the photo wherever he went over the next few days, obsessing over every possibility about who this young woman was. She was on his mind all the time, overtaking his thoughts and even haunting him in his dreams. Who was this woman? A week later, he had failed a test and was barely able to eat or drink. So he decided to go back to the tragic car accident scene. Now, he knew that the vehicle would be gone, but he hoped to find a clue who this mysterious girl was. So he got in his vehicle, placed the photo on the dashboard, and began to drive back to town towards where he was before. And like perfect timing, as he approached the turn into the road where the accident had taken place, the sky began to darken, and all of a sudden there was just all this heavy rain coming down, and it made it really hard for him to see anything. It took all of his concentration to keep from swerving off the road, as if the rain had turned into sheets of hailstone, pounding against the roof of his car.
So he took his eyes off the road for like a second or two to just look at the photo of this mysterious, beautiful girl holding the peace sign up. When all of a sudden, Yu Young's car had plowed straight into an old tree, his head hitting the dashboard upon impact, and he was killed instantly. A couple of hours later, a young man named Bong was heading into Busan for a work meeting. He was nervous and fidgety, and the sudden change of weather was just not helping him ease up. The windshield wipers were overworking, and he saw a car on the opposite side of the road. There was a car completely crashed into a tree. It was very horrific, and he would be surprised if anyone had survived the impact. Still, Bong had stopped and was preparing to call an ambulance for help, but he needed to make sure if anyone had survived. So he parked his car and ran over to this site. He opened the driver's door, and sure enough, there was Yu Young's lifeless body. It was for certain that the driver was dead. Bong opened up his cell phone, about to call an ambulance, when something caught his eye. He reached into the car and pulled out this eerie photograph. He stared at it intently and found that there was this beautiful girl with long, dark hair. She was wearing a pretty green tank with an M on it, and her hand was raised. But this time, she had 3 fingers holding up. And just like that, he felt a desire to hold on to the photo. He couldn't explain it, but he knew this was his fate. So he took the photo and placed it on the dashboard on his car before continuing his drive to his work meeting.
Thanks so much for listening. Like and share if this video gave you the chills. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell for notifications. See you next time.